Marcos stared intently at his phone screen, the city lights flickering outside the apartment window. Ever since the accident that had taken Clara's life, he avoided anything that might bring her back to his mind. But that was an impossible task. His apartment, the objects scattered around the house, everything still bore her touch. Even after 6 months, he couldn't bring himself to get rid of her clothes, her books, or the little things she had loved so much. They were all still there, as if she might walk through the door at any moment. But Clara wasn't coming back. He knew that. It was a night like any other. The emptiness of the house weighed on him, and the distant sound of car horns only seemed to amplify his loneliness. On a sudden impulse, Marcos picked up Clara's phone, something he hadn't done in months. He had kept it turned off, locked away in a drawer, as if that could somehow keep her closer. His finger hesitated for a moment before pressing the power button. The screen lit up, and he began scrolling through the photos, old messages, remnants of a life that no longer existed. Then, something unexpected happened. A message notification appeared on the screen. His stomach twisted. The sender, Clara. "I'm alive, Marcos." He blinked several times, as if the simple act of blinking could undo what he was seeing. It didn't make sense. Clara's number had been disconnected, just like her life. Trying to rationalize, he thought it could be some technical error, or worse, a cruel prank. But who would do something like that? And why? With trembling hands, he opened the message. The overwhelming feeling that something was terribly wrong flooded his body, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the screen. "You need to find me. I'm alive." Confusion quickly turned into a mixture of hope and fear. His mind began questioning everything. If this was real, how could Clara be alive? If it wasn't, what on earth was happening? Marcos spent the night wide awake. The message haunted him, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't find an explanation that made sense. The most logical assumption was that it was a prank, but the content of the message, the way it was written, the familiar tone, felt so authentic. A part of him, still fragile, wanted to believe that Clara was alive. But the other part, the rational side, fought against that idea. By morning, he decided to reach out to his best friend, Rafael. If anyone could bring him back to reality, it would be him. Rafael had always been the balance Marcos needed, especially after Clara's death. They met at a cafe near Rafael's workplace. The hustle and bustle around them contrasted sharply with the weight of the words Marcos was about to say. "I got a message from Clara," he said, stirring his coffee, not daring to look directly at his friend. Rafael frowned. "What do you mean?" "From her phone. Last night." The silence between them stretched for a few moments. Rafael looked at Marcos with a mix of disbelief and concern. "Marcos, you know that's not possible, right?" Rafael finally spoke, trying to be gentle. "Clara is gone. I was at the funeral. We were both there." "I know," Marcos replied, squinting his eyes. "But the messages, they seemed real. There were things only she could know." Rafael let out a deep sigh. "It's probably a prank. There are cruel people out there who do things like this, especially with numbers from deceased people. We need to figure out who's behind this." Marcos nodded, but something about Rafael's response didn't sit right with him. It was as if his friend was trying to dismiss the subject too quickly. Rafael's words were logical, but the way he avoided eye contact, the way he fidgeted with his hands, suggested that there was something more. In the days that followed, the messages from Clara kept coming. Intimate details about their relationship, memories that only the two of them shared. Marcos began to wonder if Rafael knew more than he was letting on. His friend's behavior started to seem suspicious. Maybe he was hiding something, and Clara's messages were the key to uncovering what had really happened in that accident. Clara's messages wouldn't stop coming. Each one seemed more specific and personal than the last. They spoke of moments Marcos would never share with anyone. The place where they had their first date, a surprise trip they took to the coast, even intimate secrets Clara had kept. With every new message, the mystery deepened, and Marcos's sanity seemed to wane. It was a cold afternoon when he decided to follow the clues. The latest message mentioned a cafe they used to frequent on Saturdays. She asked him to meet her there, as if she wanted to see him. "I'll be there," the message said. "You'll understand everything when you see me." Marcos knew it could be just another illusion, but the hope, irrational though it was, forced him to go. He arrived at the cafe and sat in the corner, at the table they always used. The place was crowded, and the feeling of being surrounded by people while living through this internal drama was overwhelming. Every time the cafe door opened, his heart raced. Minutes passed, and no one familiar walked in. No sign of Clara. Marcos began to doubt himself, questioning if he was trapped in a web of false hope. But then, in a moment of pure tension, something unexpected happened. A man sitting a few tables ahead had been watching him intently. Marcos recognized him. He was an old friend of Clara's, someone he hadn't seen in years. The man stood up and slowly walked toward him. "Are you waiting for someone?" the man asked, with a tone that seemed to carry more than just casual curiosity. "I am," Marcos replied, hesitant. "Have you seen her by any chance?" The man gave a strange smile. "She's been here recently, Clara." The words hit Marcos like a ton of bricks. "What do you mean? Is she alive?" Marcos's voice faltered. The man looked away, as if he were grappling with an uncomfortable truth. "I saw her. She asked me not to tell anyone, but yes, I saw her." Marcos felt the ground fall out from under him. The messages, the intimate details, and now this revelation. Everything seemed to point to one unbelievable truth. He was getting closer to uncovering what had really happened. Marcos returned home in a state of shock. The words of the man at the cafe echoed in his mind. He had seen Clara, alive. The last piece of the puzzle seemed to have fallen into place, but the picture emerging was not one of hope. Something was terribly wrong. How could Clara be alive after everything he had gone through? As soon as he stepped into his apartment, a familiar sound pulled him back to reality. Clara's phone vibrated on the table. Another message. "You're close to finding the truth. Go to the place where it all began." The place where it all began. Marcos knew what that meant. The site of the accident. The place where Clara had supposedly died. Without hesitation, he grabbed his keys and drove to the location, a remote stretch of winding road on the edge of a cliff. It was a dark night, the wind cutting through the silence, and the city lights in the distance seemed insignificant compared to the weight of what this road meant to him. When he reached the exact spot where Clara's car had been found wrecked, a chill ran down his spine. This was where everything changed. This was where the perfect life he had with Clara was destroyed. He looked around, searching for something, anything that could give him more clues about the messages or Clara's whereabouts. His heart raced as memories of that fateful day flooded his mind. Suddenly he heard footsteps. Someone was there, walking along the roadside. Marcos turned quickly, and his heart nearly stopped when he saw who it was. It was Rafael. "Rafael? What are you doing here?" Marcos asked, confused and alarmed. The presence of his best friend in that place felt out of context, almost sinister. Rafael stopped, breathing heavily, unable to meet Marcos's eyes. "I was trying to protect you," he said, his voice low. "Protect me? From what?" Marcos felt a surge of anger rising. "You knew about all of this? The messages, Clara? You knew she was alive?" Rafael shook his head, finally locking eyes with Marcos. "I knew she wasn't dead, but I couldn't tell you the truth. It was too dangerous." "Tell me the truth, Rafael," Marcos demanded. "Why did Clara fake her own death?" Rafael stepped back, as if weighing every word before speaking. "She got involved with dangerous people, with Marcos. They forced her to disappear, to make you believe she was dead. But things spiraled out of control. I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't. I didn't know how you'd handle it." The revelation hit Marcos like a blow. He stood still, trying to absorb what he had just heard. The world around him seemed to crumble. Everything he had believed up until this moment was a lie. Rafael's confession hung heavy in the air, but it only left more questions. Who were these people? Why had Clara turned to such extremes? And why had Rafael, his closest friend, kept this secret from him for so long? Marcos took a step forward, his voice trembling. "You should have told me, Rafael. I had the right to know." "I know," Rafael whispered, his guilt evident. "But it's not over. If they find out you're close to the truth, you'll be in danger too." Marcos clenched his fists, the weight of betrayal and confusion almost too much to bear. The one person he had trusted through all of this had been hiding the most crucial piece of the puzzle. And now, as the night closed in, he realized he wasn't just uncovering Clara's secret. he was walking into something far darker than he could have ever imagined. The truth, it seemed, was only just beginning to reveal itself. Marcos could barely believe what he was hearing. His body was on high alert, every muscle tense, but his mind was swirling in confusion and disbelief. Clara was alive, and Raphael had known all along. The sting of betrayal added to the whirlwind of emotions he could barely contain. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't you tell me? Marcos's voice was almost a shout, filled with anger and frustration. Raphael took another step back, guilt weighing heavily on his face. I couldn't. They threatened to destroy everything. She had no choice. If she stayed, you would have been in danger too. Marcos felt a wave of fury rise inside him. I would have chosen to be in danger with her. How could you both deceive me like this? Raphael swallowed hard, avoiding Marcos's gaze. She did it to protect you, but things got out of control. Now we don't know where she is. The messages you've been getting, I don't know who's sending them, but I'm afraid they're a warning. A warning? Marcos repeated, his stomach tightening. She's in real danger now. The people who forced her to disappear are after her and possibly after you too. Raphael finally met his eyes, his expression pleading for understanding. We tried to protect you, Marcos, but we failed. Marcos felt the ground collapse beneath him. Everything he had believed until now was wrong. Not only was Clara alive, but she was being hunted, and he had been kept in the dark by the people he trusted most. He needed a few moments to process the revelation, his breathing heavy and uneven. So what do I do now? He asked, his voice a mix of desperation and resolve. Raphael sighed. We need to find her before they make her disappear for good. Those words echoed in Marcos's head. His heart clenched at the thought of Clara out there, alone, in danger. He couldn't fail her again. As hurt as he was, he knew there was no time to dwell on his feelings or ask more questions. The priority was clear: find her and save her. Where do we start? Marcos asked, his anger giving way to an unshakable determination. He was ready to do whatever it took. Raphael hesitated for a moment before speaking. She mentioned a cabin, a place you two used to go. She might be hiding there. Marcos knew exactly where that was. It was a secluded cabin, a refuge they had often visited to escape the city. Now, it would be the site of the final confrontation, not just with Clara, but with the truth of what had really happened. The drive to the cabin felt like an eternity. Marcos barely exchanged words with Raphael as the car sped through the darkened roads. His mind was focused, racing through every scenario of what he might find. What condition would Clara be in? Was she truly in danger, or was there something even more sinister going on? When they arrived, the cabin stood eerily still, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the dense trees. The silence was oppressive, and every rustle of the wind felt like a threat. Marcos's heart pounded as they approached the front door, his body bracing for whatever was waiting inside. Raphael stopped him with a hand on his arm. Are you sure you're ready for this? Marcos didn't hesitate. I have to be. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open, the wooden frame creaking under the pressure. Inside, the air was heavy with dust and memories. Everything was exactly as they had left it on their last visit, but now it felt foreign, like a place that no longer belonged to them. And then, in the corner of the room, he saw her. Clara. She was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, looking pale and exhausted. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw him, her body tense as if she had been waiting for this moment, but dreading it at the same time. Marcos, her voice cracked, barely a whisper. For a moment, the world stopped. Every question, every emotion, every ounce of pain surged inside him all at once. But there was no time for anger or accusations. He rushed to her side, kneeling down, his hands trembling as he reached out to touch her. Clara, what have you done? His voice was filled with both love and hurt. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him, her hands gripping his tightly. I'm so sorry, Marcos. I never wanted to hurt you, but I had no choice. What's going on? Who are these people? He asked, his voice urgent. Clara glanced over at Raphael, who stood silently near the door, his expression unreadable. Then she turned back to Marcos. It's more complicated than you think. I was involved in something dangerous, and they threatened both of us. I had to disappear. But now, I think they're coming for me. Marcos's heart sank. We're getting out of here, now. But before they could move, a sudden noise from outside broke the tension. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approaching the cabin. "They found me," Clara whispered, terror filling her voice. Raphael's eyes darted to the window. "We don't have much time. They're already here." Marcos stood, adrenaline pumping through his veins. This was it, the moment where everything would come to a head. He wasn't going to lose Clara again. Not this time. "Stay behind me," Marcos ordered, as he prepared himself for the confrontation that would decide their fate. Marcos slowly approached the door, feeling the weight of memories and fear hanging in the air. Every step seemed to echo inside the small cabin, the outside noises muffled by the tension of the moment. Clara, leaning against the wall, stared at him, her eyes full of sadness and regret. Raphael, still by the window, kept a close watch on the movements outside. "I'm sorry, Marcos," Clara whispered, her voice choked. "I never wanted things to get to this point." Marcos didn't reply immediately. His heart was racing, but he knew he had to stay calm. He sensed they were in danger, but he didn't know exactly where the threat would come from. The silence outside was oppressive, almost deafening. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps approaching interrupted his thoughts. Something was about to happen. "Stay behind me," Marcos said firmly, his gaze shifting from Clara to Raphael. "We need to be prepared, but we can't panic." Raphael stepped closer, keeping his voice low. "They're circling the cabin. They don't seem to be here to talk." Clara shrank back further, the fear clearly visible on her face. They want to take me, and if they succeed, I'll never come back." Marcos closed his eyes for a moment, trying to organize his thoughts. He had no intention of physically fighting anyone, but he needed to think of a way to get them out of there without putting them in more danger. That's when he had an idea. Something risky, but it might be their only way out. "Raphael," Marcos began, his voice firm but with an eerie calm. "Is there another way out?" Raphael hesitated for a moment, then pointed to a small door at the back of the cabin. "There's a passage that leads to the basement. From there we can access the forest through a back door," Marcos nodded. "We'll use that to our advantage." The footsteps outside were closer now. The pressure in Marcos's chest grew with every second, but he stayed focused. He looked at Clara, who seemed exhausted and on the brink of despair. "Trust me," he whispered. Marcos signaled to Raphael, and the three of them moved carefully to the back of the cabin, trying to avoid making any noise. The sounds of footsteps and voices outside indicated that the men were approaching the front entrance. When they reached the basement door, Marcos opened it silently and motioned for Clara to go down first. The noises outside grew louder. The tension inside the cabin was palpable. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise at the front door, as if someone was trying to force it open. The intruders were about to break in. Marcos carefully closed the basement door and quickly descended, his feet touching the cold dirt floor. He felt the damp air of the basement, a narrow and cramped space, but it offered a small glimmer of hope for escape. Raphael, beside him, pointed to the back door. "If we move fast and stay in the dark, we might make it to the forest without being seen." Hearing the muffled voices and noises above, Marcos knew they didn't have much time. With Clara between them, the three moved silently toward the exit. The sound of the cabin door finally giving way echoed through the basement, and they knew they had to be quick. They pushed the back door open, and one by one, they slipped into the cold night. The dense trees and shadows of the forest provided the cover they needed. Marcos held Clara's hand, helping her move quickly, while Raphael kept watch on their surroundings. The intruders seemed unaware of their escape, still searching the cabin. They moved farther and farther away from the site, disappearing into the shadows of the forest, while the distant sound of voices echoed from the now empty cabin. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a safe point, far enough from the cabin and the imminent danger. Clara, breathless and visibly shaken, looked at Marcos. "What are we going to do now?" Marcos, also exhausted but relieved they had escaped, looked toward the horizon where the city lights were starting to appear in the distance. "Now," he said, his voice low but firm, "we move forward. Together." The cabin, once a refuge, now symbolized a confrontation with the past and the secrets Clara had kept. Though they didn't have all the answers, they had survived the night, escaping without resorting to violence. but with the promise to face an uncertain future hand in hand. The real challenge wasn't just the men chasing them, but the emotional journey of forgiveness and redemption that lay ahead.